Because we have test 2 coming up, I wanted to make a video and give you a couple of ideas of things you can study getting ready for test number 2. The first thing I want to say is this is the page that you see when you sign into my math lab, and I want to make sure that whenever you see these assignments that you go ahead and click more, and then I would print this page and use it as a to-do list or a checklist to mark off what I have already done to make sure that I'm covering everything that I need to cover for that particular week. Because the one I'm going to upload tomorrow night for you all for the next week, which includes the test, it's going to have details about the test, when it opens, when it closes, some things to take, and those are really important details. I would print them and I would make sure that I am following those details. Another thing I wanted to tell you about my math lab is to make sure you're following the syllabus calendar. It's going to be located under Course Tools under a file called Document Sharing, or a tab called Document Sharing, and then it'll be under the file that says Syllabus. And if you have not already printed your syllabus calendar, I would print it and make sure that each week, it's even a checks and balances for what I'm assigning, that you're looking to make sure that what I assigned is really on the syllabus. And hopefully it is, and if not, you're going to tell me that. I try to be accurate, but I would love to have you double checking that to make sure that what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing. The reason we are mainly here at my math lab is I wanted to point out study plan. When you click on study plan, go up to the very top and click on all chapters. Test number 2 is going to cover sections 5A through 8D of the things that we did in class. And so right here, you'll notice that there are study plan questions for chapter 5. We did not do 6, for 7, and for 8. You can play around in these. You can assign them to yourself. You can play with the quizzes. You can do what you want to. No grade's going to be taken. It's not going to add to or take away your current grade. Just use it to your advantage for studying similar problems that you'll see on the test. They're similar to your homework, and so those are similar to what you're going to be seeing on the test. As far as the test, I'm going to go to Student Materials to Print, the in-class notebook, and I'm going to scroll down to Lesson 5A. And I'm going to look through those things as you should be looking through them and asking yourself, what do you think would be some good questions to put on the test? And I went way too far. Let's go back to 5A. Still too far. And eventually, we will be at 5A. So starting with 5A, keep in mind that we don't have a lot of time in the test, and so I've got to keep it around 9, 10, 11, 12 at the most questions. And so count the sections. Probably there will be a question from each section. Like, if you look at 5A, we worked really hard getting these job comparisons manipulated and worked out. We spent a lot of time on this question 3 and question 4, but specifically, question number 5 is something I can put on the test and ask you to fill out parts of it. We don't have time for me to get you to fill out all of it, so you've got to know how to find the ratios, how to set up the dimensional analysis, and find if you had an Austin salary, what would its value be in Big Rapids or its value be in Thousand Oaks. I would keep looking through the lessons, like here on the index numbers, same thing. Question 2 is a really big question. I would make sure I understood all the parts on question 2, and if asked a similar question, I'd be able to answer it with confidence. Then we talked about how to do the index numbers, and we talked about, and part of mine is missing, but on yours, we kept talking about the cost of living index. Well, if we go on to the next section, nope, I think it's on the next one. Well, we'll start right here. Looking at 5C, whenever we had the weighted averages, at first we just did a simple average of these polls. But then as we got on through the lesson and we talked about weighted averages, there will be a weighted average on the test where you have to remember that we went over it meticulously, that step one, you multiply, and then step two, you add, and then the sum is the weighted average. That would be something like this chart on question 4 that I could definitely put on the test. And then we go on to the average income. This is like what we were looking at in 5B, where we spent a lot of time on this one. Expected value is a weighted average. And then we took time to calculate the percentage of the population. You need to go back and remember how we calculated like Phoenix and its percentage of the population. And then that became what we used to multiply times the salary, and we created a new column to add for the weighted average. That would be a really good question to ask on the test, but it could not ask something that had 10 cities, but it could ask something that had 4 or 5 cities. Make sure you know how to do expected value. We did not do 6A. We did not do 6B. But we did talk a lot about the budget. And so when you're looking at this, what could be on the test? And so something like this circle graph, I could put something like this on the test and ask you to find pieces and parts of it. And remember how we had, like on question 4, we had a bunch of money and then we had to find it to the nearest billion. That would be a really good question to ask on the test, where you have to look at the pie chart, find the percentage, and then multiply it times a total amount and report out rounding correctly. Also, parts of what we did in the budget, we looked at line items. You cannot use an Excel spreadsheet during the test. We're not going to take the test in a computer lab. But what you can do is be able to read line items and then start doing like what we did on question 2, where we did part to whole and part to part. And then you talked about what do they mean. Make sure you can find the ratios and make sure you can talk about them with a good sentence or two of what they really mean. And then could you create a pie graph, a very simple, small one? If you were given the percentages, could you, close to accurate, put them on a pie graph? We talked about changes in the budget. We talked here specifically about, like on number 4, part A and part B. Part A asks for the absolute change. You need to know that formula by memory, and you need to know part B, which is a relative change formula, by memory. You can expect those to be on the test by looking at data and then being able to write down the absolute change and the relative change. And we kept going with the federal budget, but again, we were looking at, as you see right here on this question, part 2, A is absolute change and B is relative change. You're going to see absolute change and relative change on the test. Credit scores, something else you need to go into the test having memorized. Right here. It's not on my screen. We took time to write them in class, and I took time to write them on the videos that you have. You need to have front-end DTI memorized, and you need to have back-end DTI memorized. They both have total income in their denominator, but the front end has housing in the numerator, and then the back end has recurring debts in the numerator. I told you you don't have to memorize the 28%, you don't have to memorize the 36, but you definitely need to know how to manipulate them. And like on part 3, can you find the front end? Can you find the back end? And then can you make a decision? Do you think you're going to get the loan? And then we needed to make some adjustments. And could you play around with those equations and come out with the adjustments needed to get the loan that you want? These questions, you have to use technology. I can't put those on the test. The test goes all the way to 8D. So we were looking at incarceration rates. When we did this lesson, I mentioned it's kind of like we'll be done with the lesson and go, what did we just do? Can you take data, whether it's given to you in the format of an article or in a paragraph, And then can you start pulling some data together and comparing the data, like we were able to find, what did the New York Times article say? It said one thing, the ACLU said another. Can you make a comparison? So can you dig through, find data, manipulate it mathematically, and then make a sentence or two about what you notice? When we got into chapter 8, we started looking at different ways to represent math modeling. And we talked about how to do a table. You need to know how to do that. We talked about how to, right up here where it says, know how to plot this data in on a XY coordinate plane. We did several examples of that. And then, can you identify slope? Can you identify y-intercept? Because then that repeated itself. Oh, wait. The last question or part on question 5, where it says each of the 3 to attempt to answer a question. I would need you to know how to do it once. Can you answer the question of how many weeks will it take to reach 80 ounces? It's a great question for the test. 8B, what's my car worth? We were doing more with the tables and the equations, but we introduced a new concept, proportional. And in the video and in class, I said we can find proportionality a hard way and an easy way, meaning one's long and one's pretty short. And these 2 paragraphs contain the long way and the short way, if you want to go back and review the video. But through this, we needed to know how to look at, calculate slope, and then like on question 6, looking here, can you determine which ones are, like right where it says here, which is an example of a linear equation that is also proportional, and then you got to justify your answer, either by looking at the ratios or by looking at where it crossed the y-axis. Just a little bit more about money, interest rates, and man, you better expect this on the test. Question 2 talked about simple interest, and then this is probably 3, talked about compound interest. You need to know how to calculate these, how to calculate them as simple interest, how to calculate them as compound interest, and then how to make a judgment call on, like right here, describe the differences and then which model is going to result in a larger balance. 8D, this is the last one that we're looking at. And when you're looking at 8D, we're talking about input, output. We're going to go back and look at some information. And the words that you're looking for here are regression and then trend line. I've also sent an example of how to calculate these in Excel. For the test, you're going to need to know how to interpret them. We're going to do more with line of best fit right here and running a regression. What I can put on the test is when we run the regression and find the line, or when we find the line of best fit. Can you find the slope? Can you find, it doesn't say on here the y-intercept, but can you interpret the slope and can you interpret the y-intercept? Then here, there are 2 items called a correlation coefficient and a coefficient of determination. You don't see mine here. It's going to be r squared, and that will be on the test. You're going to have to be able to find it by looking at some information. You're not going to run the Excel analysis. You're not going to do any of that. I'll have the printout in front of you. You'll need to identify what's the r, specifically what's the r squared. And then like right here on number 5, you need to be able to fill in a sentence like, what percent of the variation from the predicted value for learning is due to the changes in the, and in this case, when we do it in class and on the video, it's going to be the technology variable. So a sentence like this, it'd be good to go ahead and memorize the sentence, is what you're going to need to interpret on the test. And then you'll fill out that survey later. Actually, it's this week. So those are some quick ideas. Our test is going to be coming up. Make sure that when you are, it's not right there. When you are looking at My Math Lab, make sure you are, I'll have to go to it again. Let me grab a course. Nope, it's not going to be there. Sorry. When you go to a course, let me go to an online class. Make sure that when you see all of these announcements, you expand them, and I would print everything you see there and make sure you're doing all of the pieces and parts to get full credit for this course. I wish you the best on the test. Make sure you read all the directions and show up when you're supposed to. Show all your work, and good luck on the test.